Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sasha Chilkova. I'm a marketing manager here at Withum. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be talking about cyber warfare, payments fraud, and email compromise. Just a couple of housekeeping items to go over before we get into it. As a reminder, this is a CPE session. You'll receive 1 credit in information technology. Please be sure to participate in our polls to be eligible for the CPE credit. We are recording the webinar, so if you miss anything or would like to refer back to the presentation, we'll be sending out an email later this afternoon with a link to the recording and the slide deck. We'll keep the session about 50 minutes and leave 10 minutes for questions at the end. Don't hold up your questions till then. Please send them into the chat, the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll keep an eye on them and address them towards the end of the session. With that, Eric, I think we're ready to get started.
Sure thing. Here's a standard disclaimer slide. So, hello everybody, I'm Eric Jackson. Today we're going to go through, obviously introducing ourselves. We're going to talk about understanding cyber threats. We're going to talk about how cyber criminals monetize your data, how fraud works, phishing works, and so much more. We're going to talk about a lot of statistics related to business fraud, which is a major burgeoning part of cyber crime now. We're going to talk about how a cyber threat actor can destroy your business and why you're a target, what they're looking for, and why they want to do what they do. We're talking about cyber threat intelligence, how to know your enemies and know your vulnerabilities. Talk most importantly about how to protect your business from cyber threats and your person. And after that, we'll close it up with some final thoughts and opportunities for questions and answers. So, introduce myself. I'm Eric Jackson, VCISO for Withum Cyber. I'm a strategic security guy. I've done a lot of work in security since a very long time now, about 20 years. I worked for a couple different Fortune 500s developing security programs. I include life and safety services and financials. I was the incident management lead for United States Strategic Command, and I did a lot of security work for the government in various capacities, to include training NSA people on how to hack and how to use various tools, developing internet range for training, offensive security and defensive security tactics and stuff on a fake but very realistic internet. And I've developed a lot of tools for protecting from hackers and hacking itself. I've worked hundreds of incident cases for the military. I've got a lot of time as a penetration tester, and among other things, I'm an expert lockpicker, which I always throw that in there because it's weird. And apparently, if you didn't know, there's a competitive lockpicking sport, and I found it a long time ago, and that's what I do. I'm a competitive lockpicker. This is Matt Ferrante. He will introduce himself.
Hi everyone, Matt Ferrante, partner in charge of the Withum Cyber team. We got excellent presentations for you all today. A little bit about my background, former United States Secret Service agent. Prior to that, I worked out building hedge fund trading floors. I worked for Pfizer Pharmaceutical, healthcare systems, went into the U.S. Secret Service, built and designed the government's first computer network wiretap on online organized crime. That became Operation Firewall, and then later Operation Get Rich or Die Trying. Private sector, we worked on such things such as Sony network intrusions, Target data breach, Neiman Marcus. Cyber, it's a little bit crazy today. I think everyone knows that. Work from home has been a little bit crazy. So we got a great presentation. We're going to talk about digital lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. So what I want you to do, just kind of sit back, enjoy it, relax. We've got a lot of expertise, a lot of information to provide you all. And at the end, we have a Q&A. Please, I ask you all to ask different questions because, again, a lot of expertise, a lot of experience, and hopefully we have some time for some war stories as well. The team, what we're made up of, I just mentioned my background. We got Department of Homeland Security folks, people from U.S. Central Command, U.S. Air Force, Navy, the private sector. It is a combined effort to combat modern cyber threats today. That's the type of team that we have. You want a good team, you need people, process, technology, and the reputation to back it. And probably one more key ingredient, validation. It used to be trust but verify. Now it's verify, then trust. We live, breathe, and eat this stuff. This is what we do day in and day out. I'll turn it over either next slide or over to Steve. One more slide I got. What do? We do full end-to-end IT managed services. We do obviously security. That includes cyber assessment, running people's IT, running infrastructures for pretty much across all different niches, whether it's healthcare, whether it's financial, automotive, professional services. We do incident response, which is, I like to say it's one of my favorite, but to be honest, it's not. We always equate it to the hospital visits. No one's happy during those type of things. And I can for online, you know, the impacts that could a digital attack affect elections? Could it actually cause physical damage to environments? Yes, they can. The short answer is yes. Those are called cyberkinetic attacks, where they can cause physical damage. Cyber forensics, electronic discovery. What is forensics? Applied science and technology for use in criminal, civil, regulatory, and fact-finding matters. A lot of litigation, a lot of stuff ends up in court. We've testified Southern, Eastern District of New York, foreign courts of law. Our team has worked in over 71 plus countries and counting. Everything we do is bits and bytes. We don't just, you know, preach security. We practice it. We run environments, so we know it works. We understand there's always a limitation on financial, but security is scalable to the environment. And are you a target? That is a big question. Are you a target? Yes, you are. You are a target. Everyone's a target. For example, your Social Security can go on the dark web up to $1,000 a pop. So pay attention. Great. I'm going to hand this over next to Steve.
Well, thank you, Matt, and thank you, Eric. It's great to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate and thanks to Withum for your partnership and in inviting us to deliver on today's webinar. Thanks everyone for the opportunity. You know, what we're going to talk about today are some important issues that have existed for a long time, but have become more meaningful challenge for many companies and their financial practitioners today. And through the pandemic, it's actually accelerated in its impact, not only in just complexity, but in volume, dollar volume of losses and a number of incidents. And as Matt and Eric both mentioned, there's, you know, a variety of different angles to this, and we're going to try to, you know, really drill down and cover off on a lot of them today. My name is Steve Susnak. I represent Capital One Treasury Management as a sales leader. I've been in the industry for a long time. This is an important business for our firm. And so, you know, one of the things we want to do today as we go through the content is to gather your feedback. And so we're going to start out today by asking the first in a couple of different polling questions. And so, Sasha, why don't you tee up the first polling question?
Great. So yeah, we're just curious to see if you have a security program in place already. We'll give everyone about 30 seconds to react here. Let's see. Okay, people are still voting, and we'll share the results after I close this out. Just give people a few more seconds. It's CP. You want to make sure that everybody that needs the CP credit participates in the polls. We'll be happy to see that in the majority. Let's see, everyone's voting. I think everyone's voted. Let's share. Looks like the majority do have some sort of security program.
Well, thank you all for your feedback on that question. Eric, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over to you to keep us moving to the threat landscape.
Perfect. So we asked if you have a security program because we're going to talk about what the threats look like out there. It's good to see most people do. It's, you know, and I saw informally and formally, which I think is interesting. We see a lot about informal security programs, and we'll talk quite a bit about that. How the cybercrime economy works. A lot of people just kind of see the end result. There's a ransomware attack. There is, you know, a denial of service attack or a combination thereof, and they don't understand the motivations behind it. Illicit online markets, as Matt alluded to, Social Security number sales, important record sales, digital sabotage. It's an $860 billion per year market. And this is by FBI analysis. That means that that's only what they've seen. It's stealing trade secrets. You know, there's quite a few documented cases of various entities paying hackers to steal stuff from other people. It's a $500 billion a year industry. Data trading, which is basically getting a hold of some form of data that's valuable to somebody else, train them for data that's valuable to you, $160 billion. Cybercrime as a service. This is basically cyber hitmen, so to speak, paying somebody to take down something else that is beneficial to you. It's a $1.6 billion business. Ransomware is $1 billion, and I can tell you right now, and Matt can agree from our experiences, that number is extremely low. It's climbing so fast now that there's no way to really estimate how much damage is being done with ransomware and how much money they're making on it. So the overall cybercrime economy is a $1.5 trillion economy. Damages to private businesses, public businesses, basically the non-criminals, is approximately going to be $6 trillion by 2021. Ransomware attacks, there's one every 14 seconds as of when we collected this, projected this year to go to every 11 seconds. The top country targeted is the United States. We have the most businesses, the most stuff, we have the most industry. We're targeted the most as far as anything that they want to make money off of. Estimated records exposed from 2018 to 2023, 146 billion records. We do a lot of work with various clients that have had intrusions, and those, the next stat here, I'll tell you, the cost per record is $242 per record. That is really pretty fairly true. When somebody is attacked and they lose their records, between replenishing their or fixing their infrastructure, the legal notifications, legal ramifications, fines, it's extremely expensive. And excuse me, the cost of a data breach is $8 million. That's on average across a large industry component. It's going to cost $8 million all told, with reputational impact, to recover from that breach. And this is just to kind of highlight the point. If I want to go get a tool set and you have a security program that's not up to snuff, I can go get a tool set that I can give to a high schooler who knows how to use a computer for about $1. COVID-19, we alluded to it. It is absolutely changing the cyber landscape because everybody is cyber now. No matter who you are, what you do, even if it's just you buy your groceries online, everybody's cyber. Cyber attacks have gone up 500% since COVID-19 kicked up, and Google has been all over COVID-related phishing emails because everybody wants to know more about COVID. Spear phishing, which is targeted phishing, looking for individuals, has gone up nearly 700%. And that's because we know, hackers know, that people are using their email as primary communication now. They're not meeting in person. So they're going to target your executives, or target your HR, your accounts payable, and try to get them to click the link, to fill out their password, to send money. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about business-to-business compromise and wire compromise, business email compromise, fraud. FBI Complaint Center for Anti-Crimes received over 3,600 COVID-19 scam complaints. I want to highlight that only because at this point, if you're a victim of cybercrime, we have seen literally where the FBI has responded to people saying there's nothing we can do for you. They're so inundated with attacks now, so inundated with cybercrime, that there's nothing they're able to do to solve the problem. So it's something to make sure that you have a solid security program, because that's going to be your primary defense against cyber attack at this point. Ransomware attacks increased by 148%, much the same. I believe that number is incredibly higher than that now. The bulk of our incident response that we receive at Withum Cyber is from ransomware. The number 2 is business email compromise, which is more damaging, and we'll talk more about that. But the number 1 incident response that we deal with is ransomware attacks. Average amount of demand for ransomware attacks increased by 33%. Again, these are late 2020 statistics. This isn't right either. We've seen people get hit one time for $8,000, get hit the next time, and they're being asked for $100,000. The cyber criminals are realizing people are going to pay for ransomware attacks. We'll describe ransomware a bit more in depth later if you're not familiar with it, but just understand it's kind of the primary means of cyber attack that's happening right now. 46% of businesses that started working remotely have experienced at least one form of cybersecurity attack. Most have experienced a lot more. If everybody remembers back in March of last year when we all had to go home, a lot of companies weren't ready for that. They may have even had a decent security program inside, but they weren't ready for how to go home and deal with having their computers taken with them. The company I was working with at the time, literally, there were just people pulling their computers off the wall and walking out the door with the computers. No one was ready for that. There were a lot of people who there was no planning for what would happen if everybody had to leave. And cyber attackers took advantage of that. They knew that the network technology wasn't going to be as strong for most companies that sent everybody home. Phishing websites have become the most profitable thing, and we will talk about in hacking right now, is business email compromise and wire fraud. Phishing websites are a key component of that. You get somebody to click a link, you get them to put their username and password or to give away some details, and hackers will start phishing people inside the company, trying to get a hold of money effectively. Between March 9th and March 23rd of last year, over 300,000 coronavirus keyword-related websites were created. Very few of those were legitimate. Those were mostly malware websites, phishing websites, and other evils that were either taken down off the internet or they just moved to another place. They just keep moving around. And banks have experienced a 238% increase in cyber attacks since COVID-19. That increase in attack is directly related to this COVID and everybody works from home because everybody's banking from home now. And they know this. There's very few physical presence banks, or there were at the time. And so everybody was doing their cyber transactions from home. Finally, just a quick touch point on cyber insurance. We talk about threat, and a lot of time people will lay back on, well, we have cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is good and it's valuable, just like car insurance is good and it's valuable. But just like car insurance, if you drive drunk and you're not wearing a seatbelt, the car insurance is not going to save your life. Cyber insurance is a way to recoup after you've done everything right. No matter how good you are, something bad can happen. And when you have a phenomenal security program, you can still have incidents. You can still have security incidents that can impact your business. Cyber insurance will help you recover from that. Matt and I, as clients, have clients that we've worked with who have been attacked, and their cyber insurance won't pay because they are the cyber insurance won't pay because they are not doing their due diligence. They haven't done what they're supposed to do to make sure that they're not attacked. And cyber insurance is a very finicky thing, just like any other insurance thing, to make sure you've done the right thing. So, and then one final thing I'd like to point out as we talk through this is accountability for executives. As we move through this, we've got somebody not muted. Somebody please mute. Accountability for executives, board members, positions of trust. These people are going to be more and more likely to be prosecuted or held to a standard that will be legally, that they'll experience legal repercussions. New York, California, I believe Illinois, quite a few states, and several countries in the EU are starting to hold people accountable, or hold businesses accountable and the executives of that business for cyber breaches and the breach of customer data. So even if when you look at your cybersecurity position, you think it's expensive to fix, or it's not as big a deal as it seems, or it's good enough, understand that soon, and real soon, there will be legal repercussions definitely from a civil perspective, and there's even indications of a possible criminal perspective. So talking about threat actors and how they work, we're gonna talk about motivations and impacts, and I'm gonna hand that off to Steve here. But first, let's hit polling question number 2.
Right. We'd like to know, have you or your organization experienced an attempt by hackers at payments fraud? Yikes. Oh, wow. There's an overwhelming amount of yes. We're still waiting on responses, but interesting. Let's see. I'll give everyone a few more seconds. All right, let's make sure everybody voted. That is here for CPE. Looks like a few more responses. All right, overwhelming amount of yes. Wow. All right, thank you everyone for your feedback here.
Yeah, thank you, Sasha. That's really important information because it kind of validates, along with the first polling question, what we thought we knew. And when we get into the motivation of the threat actors, it's really, we want to distill it down into, from a banking perspective, and for our clients who do payments, who both send and receive payments, distill it down into what we know and what makes for an easy target. And when you think about this from again, from a transaction perspective, if you have customers, there have been some traditional types like counterfeit checks and ID theft, stolen credit or debit cards. Certainly those still exist today. But we're going to focus more on emerging types of fraud and what makes your company an easy target. If you think about the past year through the pandemic, the proliferation of GoFundMes and the mindset of the fraud actors to try many, many times to continue to try, all they needed to do is succeed one time has accelerated. And as Eric was speaking to, this isn't just a corporate America thing. This is big, small, public, private banks, corporate individuals, really all over the place. And we try to identify some common targets that to think about as we go through the content today. And really, complacency is right on the top of the list. And so, it's not us. We're a small company. This is the way we've always done it. You guys have heard all the cliches before. No lack or lack of a security strategy, not a chief information officer, or no documented procedures, or maybe partially documented or haven't been really refreshed in quite some time. And security really is an afterthought, and this will bear out in some of the information we've gathered as we move forward here, because it's too expensive, it's too distracting, our employees don't have time. There's a variety of different issues, including up to some of the ones where you think you're more advanced, whether you have your infrastructure in the cloud. And so let's go ahead and flip to the next page. When you think about the loss here, and we've thrown some pretty big numbers out here already, but this particular slide for me was eye-opening, because this is cybercrime by victim loss based on the type. And exactly what we're here to talk about today. So business email compromise and email account compromise are right up at the top of the list. And you can see it is substantially greater than the other numbers that are there. And you think about that, spoofing's listed on there. And I'll leave this to my military service veteran friends, and thank you for your service, by the way. Spoofing in the context of information security is a situation in which a person or program successfully identifies as another by falsifying data to gain an illegitimate advantage. And in addition to business email compromise, you can see the impact that these are having on corporate America. And it's not just in terms of the dollars, but it's also when you think about it more broadly, and there have been a bunch of examples in recent years, both the reputational risk, the brand risk, and other risks that's associated with this type of exposure. Why don't we go ahead and flip it over to the next page? And this was particularly encouraging because if you guys were kind of seeing how that last polling question went, the scope of the threat is pretty consistent. Capital One had done an analysis here where it indicated that 66% of the B2B respondents indicated that they had some type of payment fraud within the last 2 years. And I think the number on our polling question was just about spot on with that. It's no surprise. And I guess if you think about that as a practitioner who hasn't been impacted yet, I guess my first observation would be congratulations to you for not having fallen victim to it yet. But at the same time, no company is infallible, no infrastructure is infallible. And we've seen plenty of examples where it may only be a matter of time. But the effects of the pandemic more recently has been important because there are employees working remotely for the first time in their careers, employees who've been doing things the same way for a long time. And the persistency of repeated attempts continue to increase the odds that you may encounter an attack. Last month, many of you may follow the Association of Financial Professionals. They had released their 2021 Fraud and Control Survey. And it just goes to validate what we're learning here today, because they had indicated that 74% of the organizations who they sought out their opinion were targets of payment scams more recently. And so the numbers continue to rise. You know, what are we doing? What are we not doing to cause this? And so if you flip it over to the next slide, you take a look at this. No surprise, the top barriers to action. You know, not everybody wants to deal with this. When you're in the day and you're working remotely for the first time, your business has been impacted like it never has been before. You have a lot of priorities, and you want to continue to support your clients. You want to continue to try to deliver on the imperatives that your leadership has tasked you with. And a lot of times, fraud isn't really, it's important, but it's not paramount. You know, the cost is greater than the value add. The status quo is good enough. You know, we believe the current process is adequate. And it's, you know, a little surprising there, 24% indicate it's too expensive. And so these are all things that you've probably all heard before, but these are, you know, trying to neglect the impact of fraud, but it's not going away. So where do they target? And so let's go ahead and flip it over to the next page. This was a little surprising to me, because there are some things where you think that might be the primary conduit into a firm, especially for those of you who are Treasury practitioners today. The ANOR side of things is interesting because generally it's some form of revenue skimming, you know, whether it's a collection agency or an agency employee. You think about HR, could be timesheet fraud or ghosted employees. Procurement's kind of interesting because there's bribery and kickbacks a lot of times where there are big contracts that are being awarded by some firms. And then again, Treasury's out there, but AP by far is the largest area combined, really, when you look at across the board analysis. And so how's this happening? Let's go ahead and slip to the next page. You take a look at this. What are the most common methods of fraud? And it is by far business email compromise. And some of you have probably seen some examples of this. We're going to get into it here in a bit, but you know, malware and ransomware are close number two. Some have thought over the years that internal employee theft might be at the top of this list, but you see there, at least in this data that we gathered, it's a little lower down there. Well, actually a lot lower at 13%. It doesn't mean it's not a factor. And we're going to talk about some ways to mitigate that risk. But by far, business email compromise is at top. And you've probably seen some of the examples. You know, it's not just small business or privately held firms. There are celebrities, large business, really all over the spectrum who have been impacted by this. And it's got a fair amount of publicity through the media because sometimes the notion of the story behind the fraud is so simple. And you think to yourself, how could that possibly happen? But it continues to do so. And so when you think about business email compromise on the next slide, you know, what does it look like? So it can happen in a couple of different ways. And some of you have probably been trained on this. You may have seen examples that even your own internal personnel have delivered to you or you've read about in the industry. You know, there's a primary component of it is typically, in this case, a senior titled person who is making a request with a strong, almost a threatening urgency to make the payment, and a close but not exact domain name that you might miss in a rush. You know, some good, fairly examples are illustrated here. The task is to really take a hard look at these emails requesting payment you may receive and be very vigilant before you respond to them or respond at all. You know, the things that stick out here, you know, there's a supplier who may send an email and they may want to redirect or request a change in payment method. There's just some real common denominators here that we've seen that even though they've been out there for some time, they continue to be perpetrated today. And you can see the financial impact of these losses. And so I'm going to go ahead and flip it back to Eric to pick up on how to protect your business from cyber risks.
Absolutely, thank you. So we're talking about how to protect it. And on that note, let's hit polling question number 3.
All right. Excuse me. What is a sign of an email meant to defraud someone? That's a good one. All right. So far, everyone thinks it's all of the above. Give it a few more seconds. Okay, looks like almost everyone, 75% of people voted. Just a few more seconds. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to respond. Okay. Still getting some votes in. All right, thank you everybody for participating. It looks like hopefully everybody got the answer correct. What do we think, Eric?
Yep.
All right.
Kind of a gimme, right? So, always pick all of the above on a multiple choice question. 60% of the time it works every time. So business instruction via cyber. So what's interesting, Steve brings a lot to the table to explain how business fraud works. And it's the reason I love to talk about business fraud, business email compromise is that it's a low tech attack. We can tell you a lot about ransomware and malware and viruses, but all we have to do is trick people. We have an excellent cadre of hackers who work for us to assess our clients. And by and large, it's not a magical hacking trick that we get into a network. It's we convince somebody to give us their password, give us their username, give us their password. We go look at their Facebook page and say, hey, you know, what is this guy's interest? What can I talk to him about and see if I can get something from him? And so when we talk about what leads to business destruction, we've kind of touched on this, but complacency, when you have the belief that you're okay, that your business, you know, when we said, do you have a security program? A lot of people said, yes, formally we do. Is it good enough? Do you believe it's good? And that's the false sense of security that comes with that. Well, we have a security program. I have a security guy. I have an IT department that does security. Does that mean it works? And so are you just checking a box? Is the, you know, is whatever your compliance agency is in the financial sector, there's a lot of them. They're going to ask you a bunch of questions. Do you just say yes to all of them and you go, and it's true and we're good? And then there's the idea that it just won't happen to you. It'll happen to somebody else. You see it happen. We saw like Garmin go down for 2 weeks from a cyber attack, but that was Garmin. Really big deal. We're not big deals. We're not going to go down. When we talk about security itself, do you have a strategy and a plan? Steve touched on one of the bigger problems is that security is kind of being done after the fact, right? It's being done ad hoc. We buy a system, we buy a company, we merge, and we look around, we go, okay, let's secure this. It's completely backwards. Every change that's being done needs to have security attached to it as part of your process, as part of your thoughts. It's not just cyber. This has to do with all of your transactions, everything you do. When you are doing wire transactions and when your accounts payable is working with people, what are your mechanisms to make sure that you are actually secure? And is that being exercised? Is it being vetted to make sure that it actually works? One that we harp on a lot is a lack of independent security audits. You might have a security provider, you might have a technology provider who says, yes, we do security. You might have a security department that says, yes, we're doing security, and here are metrics to back that up. But without somebody else coming in and telling you, yes, it works, or no, it doesn't, you're tickling yourself. You're not going to ever know for sure whether or not that's a truly secure thing, because I can trick myself into thinking I'm secure. Lack of accountability, especially when you get into companies that may not have a dedicated security department. Who's running your security? And you'll hear a lot of, well, you know, Sam in IT, he does the AV stuff. So he has antivirus and he takes care of that. And then this other guy handles firewalls. And then, you know, in accounts payable, they've got a checklist of things they're supposed to do before they do wires. But there's not one person who's the button to say, this is your security. This is how security works. And then finally, fix on failure, which is, may sound obvious. It's not something you want to do, but the bulk of security right now in the United States in an enterprise is reactive. We don't change it until it's happened, because it's expensive. It may cause interruptions. It may not seem like a big deal. And until it happens, we're not going to worry about it. It's very common in corporate America. So protecting your business, what do you do? You know, you can, all those things we just touched on basically have a counterpoint. You need somebody to assess your security. You need somebody to come through and say, okay, you do things how, and they explain it, and then you say, okay, let's try to break that. That is both on a technological level and at a paper level, that is all over the place. And that's a VCISO, VCCO, which is a control officer or a compliance officer or a chief information security officer. Somebody who can look at your large overarching programs to include your paper processes and your accounts payable and HR. How are they doing business as well? Is it secure? Is that operation going to leave you open to something bad happening? One of the ones that's super important, that if you ask your IT guy now, if you're not an IT guy on this call and you have an IT guy, ask him the last time he tested the backups. Ask him the last time that they exercised turning off a server and what happens. Business continuity, backup assurance, vitally important stuff that needs to happen. And we see one of our larger client bases when we're doing incident response are people whose backups failed. 73% of all backups are failed. They don't work, and you won't know until you have to restore them. So ask your IT guy. If you have anything from this, well, hopefully take a lot from this, but one thing you could do right now, send an email and say, hey, when's the last time we checked our backups? Incident response exercises follow the same thing. Okay, if I turn off this server over here, ask your infrastructure guy or your IT guy, what's the most important thing we have? What happens if we turn it off? We should know. What happens if it's broken, if it blows up, if a hacker gets onto it? What do we do? This is something that needs to be happening all the time. I believe Matt touched on earlier, trust but verify, but it's starting to flip into verify then trust. We need to make sure that our gear is working the way we expect it to. We need to have it assessed on a regular basis. Our processes, our techniques, our procedures, everything should work, and we need to make sure it works. Then we can trust that process. Don't expect that it works because you say it does. Finally, open source intelligence. This is something that we recommend. It's kind of like having a third-party assessment, but there are groups and there's a function out there to have people look at your security, the way your security works, and your posture on the internet, and help you to figure out how bad it looks from the outside. A lot of times we'll interact with clients and they'll say, well, we're not a big deal. We'll run an open source intelligence report on them and find out that there's actually a lot of hacker chatter about them, that their email addresses inside have been compromised, and those passwords are floating around on the internet. And it's always a wake-up call because they expect that everything's pretty much fine. Like we said, you think everything's fine. You become complacent because you have a security department. And we end up finding that that's not necessarily the case. And open source intelligence report is a great source of that. So security measures for business. I'm going to touch on this quick. It's kind of an eye chart, and I don't want to run it too long. But at the end of the day, make sure that your workstations, you have a consistent policy on them. And with everybody working from home, that doesn't change. If somebody walks away from their desk, what happens to the computer? Does it lock itself? Does it have antivirus on it? Are your files password protected? They're critical. Is stuff being patched on a regular basis? These are important questions to answer, even with COVID, and probably even more so with COVID. We've seen a lot of clients who say, well, we just let them use their home PCs at home. Generally a bad approach, right? You don't know what their network looks like, how many compromised computers on the network, how many of their phones that their kids have infected with malwares or downloading emojis. That stuff's all exposed now at your business network. Their home network is now part of your business network. So make sure that that thing they take home is incredibly secure. Physical security, make sure that it's secure. Make sure that people can't just walk into your data center. And this is one of those things that, depending on the size of your company, if you're in a large company, Cap 1, for example, I guarantee you I can't walk in their data center. It's not a possible thing. It would be a really bad day if I tried. But we have plenty of clients who are hundreds of millions to billion-dollar businesses that have a closet next to the secretary pool that has all of their gear in it. And in doing, it is literally accessible by anybody. Anybody can walk in there and just pull out cables. And then you have to go into instant response. What happens when the cables are pulled out? Performing audits, and this goes back to what we were talking about assessments. Evaluate your controls, but use third parties. You always have to have a third party involved. And when you're talking about your own security, whether it's business to business and it's paper and process, or whether or not it's wire fraud, or whether it's business email compromise, or we start talking about malware and hackers and intruders, you need someone to look at you and look at through your processes and try your processes to execute against them to make sure that they work. Just believing they do is never going to be sufficient enough. Backups, I've touched on backups. Again, 70+% of all backups fail. Make sure you not only have backups, your backups are stored off-site, they're encrypted, so that if somebody, we had a client who kept backups at their house, somebody broke into their house and stole their backups and they weren't encrypted, which meant that everything they had was now in somebody else's hands. Restrict access to who can perform restoration. This is much the same. Make sure that not just anybody can restore data because they can steal your data. Control, and speaking of data, control access to data. This goes to kind of what Steve touched on about accounts payable. This happens a lot, even in the larger cyber arena. You'll have an HR department, or you'll have accounts payable, or general finance, or even your legal counsel, and they'll all be able to access each other's data because nobody's done any access control. And we have had several clients that have been, in one case, there was a financial where the HR group got knocked over, or so to speak, they were hacked via email. They used that, the hacker did, to get into the financial data. And then they started exfiltrating financial data and they compromised still more stuff. It also has one other side effect that's really useful. When you control access to data, you prevent ransomware from spreading as furiously as it can, because ransomware acts as the person who is attacked. And this is a very complicated thing, but understand that it greatly reduces how bad ransomware damage will be if the person from HR can't get to your vital records, or whomever, whatever person. People should only be able to get to what they need to know and no more. And then instant response, which we've touched on as well. I want to make sure that people understand that when you have an incident, you need to have a plan. And there's an old Mike Tyson quote that's one of the best. It's, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Make sure you try your instant response plan. Aside from just having an instant response plan, make sure it's tried out and true. This has to do with restoring your data. This has to do with third-party assessments and audits. It's what happens when something goes wrong and how do we fix it. More security measures. Remote work, I mentioned, don't allow people to use their own gear. If you have any capability or control in that, issue out company gear for people to use when they go home, and use VPN and use 2FA, which is two-factor authentication. If you haven't seen it, it's probably a bad thing, and you should. Your company should be using it. When you go to access their resources, you put your username and password. It's going to ask you for a code that comes to your phone, or a hard key if y'all are a little behind, and it will greatly increase your security. It makes hacking a lot harder. Other things that could be very helpful and really something that you should focus on as you're building a security program, or if you have questions about a security program, these are questions to ask. Do you have file integrity management, which is, say, if somebody tampers with a file, will you know? If somebody's stealing data, is there a mechanism for you to know? It's called data loss prevention. I am jumping all over the bullets here because I am. Do you have a threat intelligence solution? We talked about open source intelligence. Do you have somebody letting you know when you show up on the dark web? And finally, understand your cybersecurity policy. If you don't have one, it should be a document. There should be stacks of documents related to your cybersecurity policy and general security and best practices. Understand it. And no matter who you are, you should understand it. And the higher you are in a company, the more you should understand it. So this is just more on how to protect yourself. Is assess risks, understand what risks you have, third-party assessments, that kind of stuff, and avoid human error. We like to say that basically automation will save you. Anything that can be avoided being done by a human should not be done by a human. If you listen to all the things we talked about here, the common denominator for somebody getting hacked is a person clicking a link, giving away their password, infecting the system with malware, or even just not performing security tasks correctly if you have a security department. Be prepared for the worst and understand that it's going to happen. Even if you have a perfect security program, if your security program is just the absolute best, you're still going to experience problems. There's quite a few security vendors who are very well respected in the community that have security incidents because bad things will happen. The key differentiator is that they were able to recover quickly because they have very solid security programs. And just understand that hackers are going to find the weakest link that exists. No matter what it is, they're going to find it. And so there's something called security through obscurity. And you may hear it if you're talking to security people and say, they may not use that term. They'll say, well, it's so old, no hacker will go after it, or it's hidden so well, they'll never find it. Categorically untrue. They will find it, guaranteed you. So with that, let's go to polling question number 4.
All right. Let's see, final question. Does your organization regularly test its users with phishing attempts? See, got a good percent of people who say no. Give it some more time. All right, just a few more seconds for everyone to get the answers in. All right, thank you everybody for voting. So it looks like some of our attendees are on the right path. Some are not quite there yet. Okay, thanks everyone for sharing that.
So I always get a kick out of it. When I design polling questions, there's kind of always a sarcastic answer on there. I love that somebody's playing along with me. There's at least one in there for the 2% for we get so many spam emails we can't tell what's what. But on that, I'm going to hand this off to Steve, who is going to talk about how to especially protect yourself from business-to-business fraud and business email compromise that we've talked about. Not hearing you, Steve.
Let's see. Let's try that.
There, thank you, Sasha. So thank you, Eric. So, this last portion is really for the Treasury practitioners out there. And I really appreciate the feedback on the polling questions, because to Eric's point, it is amazing how competent and how professional some of those phishing emails are. And in the rush of day to day, how easy it is to, when you're getting tens and hundreds of emails on a regular basis, to let those slip through the cracks. And so when we think about the businesses today, many small businesses do not have an in-house fraud control resource, but it doesn't mean they can't take steps. And so you think about the basic fundamental focus here. Don't know, don't click. Make it hard on the fraudsters. Think about the fundamentals in all the payments that you're transacting. And so engaging positive pay line recognition, separating employee duties, having dual control release. Train your employees, give them the opportunity to stay abreast of what the newest techniques and newest technology is out there. And then also have periodic audits, and really, in some ways, challenge your employees to not only do what they're doing now really well, but to consider different payment rails as you move forward. Get away from checks. My goodness, I've been in this long enough to know when there were still professionals around there saying that the checks would be gone by the year 2000 and some, and now here we are, and there's still a very meaningful portion of the business that you all transact in the B2B space. Consider card and other payment rails for some of those alternatives. Monitor your accounts and sign up for creditor alerts. Just good fundamental security hygiene. Certainly one of the ways to do that is to talk to your bank partners and your other financial partners about products and solutions that you can use to better manage risk. When you go ahead, you can flip over to the next page. Just continuing this theme, and a little of this might be redundant with what Eric was covering off on, but my goodness, never respond to any kind of suspicious email. Hover over attachments, check senders' email addresses, make sure they're not dangerously close to ones you're accustomed to, but they're not really accurate. Use strong and different passwords. Never put sensitive data on unsecured computers. As we've gone through the pandemic, at some point we hope to be able to get back to the office. And so when you do, or if we do, depending on how that goes, if possible, dedicate one or a smaller group of workstations to do all your banking transactions, if that's possible. Be guarded about who and what software can be loaded onto your machines. Know your sender. Consider a test ongoing for your employees, especially those where they have either origination or approval administrative rights, to make sure that nothing's slipping through the cracks. And certainly monitor and review your transactions on a frequent basis, if not daily, just as a best practice to mitigate the downside. Because like we've said, there's nothing that the fraudsters can't break through. But if you practice some of these good best practices, you can control some of the risks that you face. And finally, like I said, there's a lot of expertise out in the industry. Engage your existing partners, maybe take a look at some new partners, see what's out there to continually kind of challenge yourself as much as you do with your other business imperatives, to make sure that you're managing this as effectively as you can. I know we've covered a lot of information in a short time. Our hope is that you will take this back to your offices, your companies, and consider, or really try to compel your firms to take action, better insulate yourself from this risk, because we could have probably delivered a lot of this very same content 2 years ago, or even more previous to that, but yet you still see the numbers for exposure and compromise going up, like we saw here today. And so, when you think about it, not only for the financial side of things, but the reputational risk, the brand risk, the financial loss for your company, we really encourage you to continue to focus on this, and best of luck certainly to you all. Thanks everyone. Thanks again to Withum. This is a terrific opportunity. Thank you for your engagement. And Sasha, I'll flip it back to you and we can launch into Q&A.
Great, thank you, everybody. We do have a couple of questions. We have about 8 minutes. Let's see how much we can get through here. Somebody did ask, let's see, what are the steps that should be taken if you receive a ransomware attack? Just brief, besides crying.
So it really, like anything in this, it depends. First and foremost, if you see a sign of it, disconnect everything. That's a technical response. For the technical response, disconnect so it doesn't spread. If you don't know what has caused it, you definitely want to just get disconnected and figure it out from there. Your next step should be to exercise your incident response plan. If you don't have an incident response plan, or if it incorporates a third party, contact that third party. Ultimately, the idea is to stop it from spreading, to figure out what damage has been done, to figure out ways to recover from it. There's like a 5% chance you can cover without paying, if you want to actually decrypt the files. Beyond that 5%, you basically have to make a decision. Do we have backups that are worth restoring, or do we pay the guys? And for a multitude of reasons, I'm going to officially say never pay the guy. There are circumstances where I'm sure that you can, but I recommend don't. And then finally, you go to recover, right? You look at what your backup options are, what your restore options are, what your business recovery option is, and go from there. So it's kind of vague. I would make sure you have an exercise incident response plan, because that's going to be what you do, is go ahead and execute on that. From a very technical perspective, we disconnect everything. We find it everywhere it is. We rip it all out, and we generally rebuild every platform that it touched, because we can never be completely confident that everything that was ransomware has been removed, even if we're able to decrypt.
I just want to add one other thing to that. In terms of what we've seen in the past is that companies do not have crypto accounts, and you can't just create a crypto account even if you wanted to pay the ransom. If you have a cyber insurance policy, there's situations where they can't pay the ransom either, because they may be on an OFAC list where that strand of ransomware is connected with Iran or North Korea, and if that ransom is paid, you can be fined up to $20 million, so and potential jail time. So be careful. A lot of people just say, oh, you just pay the ransom. You can't do that. It's becoming more and more strict. So you really have to know what you're doing in those situations. But I think one other important aspect is if you're getting hit with ransomware, especially more than once, there's bigger problems within your environment. I always say, Noah built the ark before it rained, not after. So you should prepare for these impacts now. In most cases, when a company is being paralyzed by ransomware, it's because there's wider issues in the environment. Look to mitigate them, testing the backups, business continuity of the environment. That type of stuff is very critical before these impacts happen. During those impacts, it becomes very difficult. Some of the ransomware can be unlocked, but in most cases, if it's more some of the sophisticated, it's gonna be very difficult.
Thank you. Another question we have, Eric, got a couple of people really liked when you said, now it's verify, then we trust, or earn trust. And any thoughts on how to improve third-party cyber and GRC integrated risk?
So there is, in security practice, there's, a vendor management program, right? So your third party should be vetted through the same processes we recommend you're vetted through. They should be able to provide evidence of it. There's several products out there. One is called the Standard Information Gathering Template, the SIG. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of the vendor, but it's a great starting point to ask questions to your vendors and say, hey, how are you doing these things? It is not the answer to the security, but it will help you understand what the security looks like. They should have third-party assessments. They should have a vendor management program themselves. They should have everything that we're expecting you to have: security program, multi-factor authentication, long crazy passwords. A SIG is incredibly intense asking all those questions. And so I recommend that's a starting point if you don't have a vendor management program. If you don't have a vendor management program, though, you need to develop one of those. And that's kind of another thing that we recommend, that you get an expert in who can help you develop a vendor management program as a holistic process, because it'll also encompass financials in addition to just cybersecurity and a lot of very esoteric things that will help you comply with regulations, because your company may comply with local regulations, but the third party you've hired doesn't. And that can be just as problematic for you if something goes wrong with them.
Great, thank you. Let's see if we have time for one more. It's interesting. Any insights in the percentage of cyber hacks coming from state sponsors?
It's kind of, if you remember back, there was Hackers for Hire, $1.6 billion industry. That is generally how that works. There's very few hackers who are obviously within the state from which they're hacking, so they're hired. So this is Eric Jackson's completely wild guess opinion on this. About 25%. In all of my cyber time in the military and all the cyber time since that I've been working, you run into certain telltale signs where you go, ooh, that is definitely not some kid in his basement. That is targeted and intent and full of intent, and generally has some sort of mean behind it that indicates state sanctioned, state sponsored. And this is something I tiptoe around because there's a lot of sensitivities around this topic. There's a lot of countries that if I asked anybody, name 3 countries who would attack via cyber, you could probably name all 3 of them. But we see a lot of that. But I would say about 25%, because ransomware attacks, which are the most prevalent, business email compromise, those are all profiteering efforts. They're not out to do real damage. Not that they don't, and not that that can't be state sanctioned, but the real brutal, ugly state sanctioned attacks, I'd say, are about 25%.
Yeah, just one other thing I'd like to add to that is, the lines have been blurred between online organized crime and state sanctioned actors a long time ago. So just obviously identifying where the threat's coming from can be difficult, but long time ago, we've already made the nexus between online organized criminals and state-sponsored actors, so they work hand in hand.
Great, thank you for that. We're right at the top of the hour. I think we will wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As a reminder, Withum will issue your CP certificates within 30 days to the email that you registered with. And thank you, Matt, Steve, and Eric. Thanks so much for joining us, and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.